Hi, I'm Paddy Fitzpatrick, the director for the software sector within AWS for the UK and Ireland. And welcome to our AWS for Data YouTube show. I'm really pleased to be joined by Guy Roberts and Harry Perumal from both from Sophos. So, Guy, introduce yourself, please.
Great to be here, firstly. So Guy Roberts, I'm the VP of Engineering for Labs Platform, and that is a part of Sophos XOps.
And Harry?
Yeah, thanks for having me first. And it's my pleasure to be here. And I'm a senior manager with Sophos Labs. And I manage the building of the content and delivering of the content along with the processing of the big data teams. So part of the Labs Platform team.
So for people who don't understand Sophos and what you do, could you tell us a little bit more about
Sophos is a global leader in cybersecurity. It was founded in 1985, can you believe? Way back when cybersecurity was called antivirus, and founded in Oxford. That's what we do. So we sell cybersecurity products and services.
And you mentioned XOps, so I can't start without understanding what is XOps.
So XOps, I like to think of the kind of core of Sophos. We create all the secret sauce that goes into Sophos's products and services. So we create all the threat intelligence and the detections and the protection that kind of drive all of the products within Sophos.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. So tell me a bit more about the Sophos products and how they've evolved.
Well, way back when, it was all about the end products that go into the various different places where the customers need them. So over the years, we focused on that. We now have what we call a suite of next generation products. So we have the Intercept X flagship product that runs on the endpoints, and then we have a range of products with the XG branding that are the firewalls and a few in between. Now we have a centralized console where you can manage those in a unified way. And we call those products next generation. So that means that they have AI and ML engines in there. They have behavioral aspects to them, and they are kind of tightly coupled to the cloud. So that's the product range as it is. And then recently we've added detection and response capabilities. So this allows our customers to understand their risk profile and sort of see incursions from the bad guys and respond to that. So that's the EDR capabilities that you'll hear about in the industry. And in the last couple of years, the last piece on that, so I mentioned the service layer, is we want to add a service, or we have added a service offering on top of that. So that's where we manage for our customers, we manage that response using the tools that we have. That's the MDR service that we've layered on top.
Okay, so
that's how we've evolved over time.
So EDR is
endpoint detection and response, and then MDR is managed detection and response. That's where we take those tools and we actually manage them for you as a service. Much like AWS manages your infrastructure rather than you investing your time and looking after your own data center. So very, very similar to that in some sense.
Got it. Great. And are you seeing customers want to have that management of it rather than them having to run it themselves?
Yeah, I think, with the increasing diversity of threats out there, in particular with GenAI coming up, just keeping up to speed with what you need to do is just becoming more and more complicated. And we're now at a point really where most customers can't effectively keep up and can't effectively manage their own estate. So they really do need a service like this, which is why we're focusing on it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So you mentioned GenAI or generative AI. So, I mean, it's quite evident now that organizations are having a massive culture change as they think about generative AI. How does Sophos think about generative AI?
Well, the first thing to say, I think, is certainly AI, is not new to us. So we've been using AI, machine learning in the industry, cybersecurity industry, and in Sophos too, for, I guess it goes back to the days of Bayesian analysis in spam 20 odd years ago, and iterations of that through those years. I suppose the next milestone for Sophos was 2016, when we acquired Invincia, and that brought in the deep learning kind of neural network level of sophistication for ML. And we now have that type of model. We have dozens of instances of that type of technology running in production all the time, have done for a number of years. So it's not new, but I think GenAI is a new chapter. It is different, and so yeah, we're starting to embrace it.
Yeah, as you say, we've been working together for years on artificial intelligence, machine learning. But GenAI seems like it is a new chapter. Do you want to expand on how that's changed your thinking?
Yeah, so certainly I think the way that we see AI in Sophos is really those two buckets. So you have the smaller, more focused ML models, and if you think about their input, normally it's some threat object, it's some feature vector, and their output is deterministic, and it's a verdict, so it's not very verbose. And that's what we have embedded in our systems. GenAI is very different. So the input is human language, really. The output is non-deterministic, so you don't always get the same output each time you run it. And I think one key difference is with those smaller, more targeted models, we've incorporated them to a point now where they can largely run with a few kind of guardrails on their own and provide value on their own. With GenAI at the moment, we're not at that point. They really are kind of co-pilots. They are there to aid and help ultimately a human. So that's the kind of differences in the two types that we see. Yeah.
Okay. And can you give me some specific use cases for generative
In
AI?
cybersecurity, yeah, I suppose there's really a couple of buckets of those. So it's what it means for the threat landscape and what the bad guys are doing with GenAI. Then there is obviously what we're doing with GenAI to the good guys. And then in particular Sophos, we have a particular use case, which is how we grow our services business, our MDR business, in a kind of non-linear way. So those are the three buckets of use cases that I like to think about GenAI for Sophos.
And specifically, if you're specific about a certain case, then the cybersecurity as a service, we have about 23,000 customers. But when this business grows, we cannot be growing the teams to support that. So we need GenAI models to be there to create those playbooks to rapid protection for our customers. So that's important for us.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, it allows you to scale through technology. Yeah. So you mentioned the guy about cyber criminals using generative AI, and it strikes me that we hear a lot about people rushing towards wanting to use it, but it also becomes quite a powerful tool for bad actors.
Yeah, in certain ways, the bad guys, any technology for that matter, is used by both good and bad, and GenAI doesn't seem to be the different one there. So it could land in the hands of bad actors, where they can become more sophisticated in their attack. So they can become faster in their campaigns. So specifically, if you're quoting an example, being phishing emails. So they want to do a campaign, and they can do it much faster, much more authentic text on those emails for them to capture the attention. The other one is they can develop malware tooling on that. So they see some vulnerability, and they can fastly develop a tool to spread the malware on that. So that's another case where the bad guys can get into using the GenAI.
So I'm right in thinking that it lowers the barrier to entry for one to be sophisticated.
Yeah, it does that too. I agree.
criminals.
I agree with Harry. I think the primary actual usage is making them more efficient with the types of attacks that they've been doing in the past. Plus, it lowers the barrier to entry for new people who want to do this type of thing. That's really where it's changing most things. There are some particular, threat vectors related to the actual technology, with jailbreaking AIs and getting them to do things. But really, they're at the proof of concept stage. There's not really that much activity around them. So at the moment, really, it's just that efficiency boost that the bad guys are getting, and the barrier to entry that we're all kind of seeing. So I think that's where the biggest boost is at the moment. Yeah.
And how have you responded within Sophos Labs?
Well, I suppose we've certainly developed sort of features to help our customers understand how their users are accessing some of this technology. So we have web filtering. So that's one approach on the product side of things. We certainly use, I suppose there's two ways that we use it as the good guys. So again, a lot of it is around automation and being more efficient about about the approaches that we take. Remember, these things are always co-pilots, so they're helping our analysts. And it's actually quite good timing for us, because if you think about the kind of alert fatigue, the volume of information that keeps coming our way, and you think about the classes of data in cybersecurity, so you really have the threat objects themselves, spam emails, web pages, files, and you have the detections themselves. Both those two things either are text-based, language-based, or you can generate reports about them that are text-based and language-based, which makes them really, really amenable to some of these technologies. So given that, we can use all the types of things that, off-the-shelf things that you would expect from GenAI, because they are, the nature of these things is that they are text-based. So we're using all of it, the semantic search, the vector DBs, the RAG things, and all the automation that comes with that to make us more efficient and more accurate in response. So, Harry, you got anything to add?
I think pretty much covered everything. Yeah. There are specific use cases where we look at the data, and then the researchers have come up with a certain playbook. Okay, they see this. Then we can call the customers and tell them, okay, you are under attack. So those kind of things can be done much easily with GenAI.
So there's the speed of that.
Speed of that.
When I speak to customers around about artificial intelligence, and especially generative AI, we have conversations around what they need to do culturally. And so how do they build a culture where people understand prompt engineering, or are more confident to look for AI and how it can help them do their jobs or serve their customers. But it strikes me that also within the culture of using GenAI, there's a security culture that needs to be evolved around it as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly I would say, with GenAI, I think obviously it's garbage in, garbage out. So a lot of it is about getting the upstream data right. And we saw this with early iterations of AI too, with the deep learning. It's great to have the mathematics, the algorithms, but unless you get the data right, it's not that much, it's not that good. And so a lot of effort that we saw back then, getting that stuff to market is also true here. So I think really, you need to be thinking about your data quality and your data hygiene upstream to get the best that you can out of AI. That's one key thing, I think. The other thing I think with AI is there is a hype cycle, and you need to be getting the balance right with that. So I think all of us are exploring and learning. And given the nature of what it is, you've got to explore and learn. But I think when you pull things towards production, you've got to have them kind of underscored with good old-fashioned business metrics, and kind of walking the balance between the two, I think, is key. So yeah, Harry,
to add to that, when we have this garbage in, as the guy mentioned, garbage in, garbage out, the quality of data that goes into the AI systems is very critical, and what goes in shouldn't be poisoned. So we need to take care of that as well. So the integrity of those generative AI systems is very, very critical for us.
Yeah, I've heard people talking about going slow to go fast.
Yeah.
So getting the data and the data integrity right first before even looking at a generative AI model or training models. So I guess you'd agree with that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So there are quite a lot of different types of data that we get, but the quality of the data that goes through the researcher's analysis first, that's very important. So that's the very highest quality of data. And then we have machine analysis of data that's coming through, and then the feed that we get from the industry. So that helps us to produce a good model that will be useful for protecting our customers. So that's where it stands out.
And to what degree do we think, as we sort of wrap up on GenAI, to what degree do we think it is a hype cycle, or what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I mean, I think you've got to, For sure, some of it is hype, but you've got to explore and find the right places where it's going to work. And without doubt, you've got to do that. And I think the people that do that in a kind of subdued, kind of behind the scenes, metric driven way, whilst that won't grab the headlines, I think it will be those people that, or those companies or those organizations that actually win in the long term with this stuff.
So data quality is critical for the effectiveness of product insights to any consumer. But what strategies does your organisation employ to gather and maintain high quality data?
Harry, do you want to take this?
Yeah. So what we do is we have our edge servers running on all over the world. So when the data comes into each of our edge servers, what we collect them and make sure they are processed correctly, so that they might contain the PA information. So before they leave that region, we ensure that the data is removed of any PA information, and they contain both PA information and the threat related information. So for our research, we are interested only in the threat related information. So when the products are being developed, they work with the legal teams to put the right data in the right place so that it is easy to strip off those PA information and take only the valuable threat information for our further analysis. So that's very important for us. And once we have that into our systems where it can be processed, then it is a matter of us giving it in the right format for the researchers to look at it.
So, I mean, what Harry said it right there. I think we're quite lucky in the cybersecurity industry. Probably not the same, in other places, but the data that we are interested in is about the threats themselves, the threat information that's within the artifacts, and that is very often very different than the data that is private to the customer. And so our job is to split the two. And if we do that well, which we need to do, then actually we're in a kind of philosophically aligned place with that. So.
And I know we've spoken before about the volume of data that Sophos manages. Give us an idea for the sort of scale of data and threats.
I'll do my bit, and then Harry can add. So we have Harry's talked about the edge services. So we have edge services that respond to the Sophos products out there. We do billions of queries. We do billions of queries an hour, responding to those. So giving answers to the products. And that drives a huge amount of data, which is the data that we then process in the back end. And Harry, hopefully you've got a number on the...
Yeah, so we have about 6.2 million endpoints running our products. So when they send back, we are able to process about 60 terabytes of data in a day. And to manage this, we cannot take everything and be processing it. So we need to ensure that we look at the signals and leave out the noise. So that's where signal to noise processing comes into picture when we are dealing with the big data volume. So,
okay, so I mean those are big numbers, billions, and so when you say signal to noise, just expand on that for me, please.
So we get a lot of telemetry from our endpoints. Mm-hmm. So it is critical that we get clean, we get unknowns, we get certain definite detections. So it is important for our researchers to know what they need to see. So the use case comes from the researchers. They're saying, okay, this is the type of data that they would like to see. And when we are able to filter out what is not required, so that's the filtering out of the signal.
Yep.
And leaving out the noise. So that's the signal to noise that I'm talking about.
And most people who even watch this won't be dealing with billions of processing billions of pieces of data, every hour. So how do you then think about data quality, tiering, that sort of thing? What's your advice to people?
Well, I think it's so the signal to noise thing I think is important, because if you throw away the noise, then you're reducing the risk of that noise having some private data in it. So just focus on what you need. For us, that's threat information. That's the signal to noise piece. I think it's important to have clear boundaries of between classes of data. So we have data upstream that we keep as close to the customer as we can, and then we have definitive boundaries. And when we have a new data type cross one of those boundaries, that's a trigger moment for going through that, discussing with legal. So it's having those clear boundaries between the different data domains, and we set that up, that kind of way of thinking, that philosophy, that framework around the time of GDPR, and it's served us pretty well. So having those clear boundaries, I think, is important.
And I think, Harry, you mentioned PII and GDPR. So a lot of you need to protect customer data, don't you? And there's a lot of considerations around the rules and regulations around that as well.
For sure, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so how do you handle the ethical concerns related to data privacy and consent in different regions?
So it's really critical for us to be ethical about what we are handling.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the PA filtering comes into picture. So we cannot store data more than what it is required for. So our legal teams are very strict on how long we store the data, what kind of data we store, and where it is stored, how it is stored. All those kind of things comes into picture. So when a customer is, the endpoints are sending the data, we make sure when they're crossing the boundaries, those data is again PA filtered, and only the threat-related data is taken into our research systems. So that's where we are very specific about how we handle the data. So when we look at the data from our end after it is being processed, it is not possible to find where it came from or individual users where it came from. So to that level, we can anonymize the data.
Excellent. And over and above some processes and technology, I think when we were talking about generative AI, we touched on culture. So when we think about data strategy, how do you think about culture, and how do you develop the right culture when people think about data? So.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating topic, really, and it's hard work to get the right type of data culture to develop your data strategy, really. And I think there's a couple of reasons why that is. One, I think, is the good old people see organizations in human hierarchies, and that's how humans have evolved to work. But that's not necessarily a great way to run or to house a data strategy. So you've got to think of ways of kind of changing that. You can't really run it in a hierarchical way. So really, it's those good old principles that come up with agile development, for example. You need to get teams to be empowered and owning their decisions end to end. You need to do that within guardrails and guidelines, but you need to sort of step back and allow them to be empowered. That's important, I think. You also need to make sure that teams own that delivery end to end, and that when a team is developing a new feature or a new product, that the data output is an important part of that product or a data product, and the team doing the feature needs to own that. I think that is key. I think you also need to really grow the disciplines within data science, so data engineer, data analyst, all those different disciplines. You need to grow and nurture those as individual disciplines and give them pedigree and give them the support. But you don't want to silo those. You need to have those skill sets and those disciplines within those individual teams. So you want to have teams that are made up of those different disciplines and software developers and DevOps people, but you certainly need to nurture those things. So there's some of the things. I think some of the other things that I'm sure other companies would have challenges with that Sophos has. So Sophos is built from it's cybersecurity. So the people that are in the company, they've come to the company because they are cybersecurity experts. They're not data experts. And I think somebody recently said every company these days is a data company. I wouldn't entirely say that, but I can sort of see where they're coming. And so you've got to take these professionals and you've got to get them to understand data, and you've got to get them to embrace it and start kind of showing them how it can lead the way in their particular profession. And I think that's a journey also that we've been on. So yeah, a few things there. It is difficult and it's not easy to get right, but I think that there's some pointers there. So.
Well, really interesting there about the culture of those teams, and it feels, as you say, it breaks away from the traditional hierarchy.
Yeah.
And it makes me think again of Amazon and how we would have two pieces of teams, cross-functional teams, small teams that can manage a product end to end, and it's almost quite organic in nature in that sense.
I had two pieces of teams on the tip of my tongue there, but it didn't. I didn't. I held it back, but exactly.
Oh, well, I'm the one to bring the Amazon
sure.
flavor to it. Excellent. And also, I guess it's important not to be fixated on the tool.
I think that's a really important one. I think it happens quite a lot. Is people spend a lot of time deciding which is the best tool, and of course, getting the right tool is an important part of it, but it's not all of it. I think really you need to focus on the job and how you approach the job. And in many sense, as long as you've got a reasonable tool, you will get the job done. What happens if you focus on the tool is that you land up thrashing, you land up migrating from one tool to the other, and you land up focusing on what the tool can do and comparing it. Meanwhile, you're not getting on with the underlying job. And I think that is an understandable distraction sometimes that organizations have on the tool.
Yeah, to add to that, there are companies which have solved the existing problems. What you're facing, the others would have already solved it. Look at how they have solved it. And then it's easy for you to, what's your use case? Can you use that solution for yourself? So going in that line will help. And not randomly going around, but making sure that you are following the right method to do it. So that's important there.
Makes a lot of sense. So if we turn to processes that are driven by data, how do you ensure that data-driven insights make their way into product development and to the products and services that you offer to your clients?
How do we make sure our projects and products are data-driven? I would say a couple of ways. So one is we obviously have a process like everybody else has for ideation through delivery and project setup. And we ensure that there are success criteria that are related to data observables, so metrics. So that's one thing. Everybody should be doing that to some degree. I think the other one is making sure that data is an output, not just a measurement of success, but an output of the product. So those are a couple of things in terms of actually delivering projects in a kind of data thoughtful way.
And do you have an example of where a data-driven insight has changed the development of a project,
For sure.
of a product, or the outcome of a project?
Yes. So we have something called the early warning system, so which is purely driven by data. We have a lot of threat data available, and when the researchers look at it, they can say, okay, this particular thing or a particular customer is under attack. So they can warn the customer early. So when we developed that, and it became a driver for the managed detection and response teams. So that's a business that we diverted into from the early warning system. So that's a very specific example of how the data is driving our business.
Yeah, excellent. And what about user interfaces or things like that? I guess.
So this is an interesting one. So internally within my team, our users, our internal researchers and analysts, they are notoriously difficult to get requirements from. I could completely understand why. They're focused on the cold face. They're dealing with the next outbreak or the next ransomware attack. And so we obviously work very hard to see what they need, and we do that. Of course we do. But also we get telemetry from our tools, so we can see which tools they're using and which tools they're not, and the ones that are not is actually equally important, and that tells us where we can focus. Sounds simple, but actually it's very effective.
Excellent. So how do you prioritize which data points are most important to focus on, and how does this influence product roadmaps?
We do. I mean, I suppose there's a couple of areas. We do try and use the data to infer a sense of ROI in terms of metrics. So we do that. So we have success criteria for our projects, and we have a sense of ROI with them. But I do think you need to blend that with good old-fashioned experience as well, and have a kind of combination of those two things. So that's what we tend to do. Yeah.
So the tech landscape is it's brimming with technology products and choices, and people have to navigate through that. So can you give me some insight into how you've made some technology decisions in terms of what technologies you've decided to use?
Certainly, we've certainly been on a journey in the last decade or so. And I've been at Sophos for 10 years now. When we started at Sophos, we were managing all of our infrastructure in our own data centers. We had a massive Hadoop cluster, I believe, that we used to drive all our insights from, and we looked after that. So we've come a long way from that. We're now 90% there or thereabouts in the cloud, and along that path, on the big data front, we've made a few decisions. And Harry, I'm sure you can share those.
So like any technology, there is limitation. So with the data center, we had limitation of how much of telemetry that we can process, how much we can store. So that's when we decided, okay, we need something bigger for that. So we looked at S3 as a data lake. And when we took on S3 and then Redshift as our data warehouse, so we were able to process much more efficiently and store much larger data, and for a longer period of time, so that the researchers can have a look at it. And not only that, our edge servers are also supported by the DynamoDBs for their reputation and other things. And we are also looking at the OpenSearch, which the researchers love it because it gives them the faster response, and we can ingest the data much faster and much more easy to query. So that's where the OpenSearch stands.
Okay,
and
so
we are looking at semantic search and everything else. Yeah.
Okay, so you're using OpenSearch and DynamoDB, Amazon Redshift, and S3. Excellent.
Yeah.
So what about the road ahead? What's in the future for Sophos?
Well, I'm not sure in terms of technology, but what I do think is pretty interesting in this whole space is that, at Sophos, we've invested pretty heavily in this type of infrastructure, and we have a lot of data coming in. We have a lot of data that's there already, and we have streams of data coming in. And what's interesting now with GenAI and these new techniques that are coming up is we can take those and apply them to our existing infrastructure and data. And I'm quite excited to see what latent value we can extract from that. So that's where I'm excited about the future.
Harry, what have your views?
So yes, what Guy was saying is where we look at the data, and it's critical that we build some playbooks so that we can respond to our customers much faster. Currently, using GenAI, we can do that. The early warning system that I spoke about was an example, but we can be much faster in delivering using the GenAI technologies. Yeah.
Okay, and I know that you've had the opportunity to work with the AWS service teams to look at different technologies and new technologies. What value do you get out of that access with the service teams, where you can go and dive deep?
Well, I think it's true to say that the pace of change, even going back to the cloud revolution and then big data and then GenAI is fast, and it's hard to keep up, especially when you're focusing on your own domain area, your domain expertise, your day job, really. And there is a gap. There's a gap between what we can do and what we can take advantage of. And I think the great job that AWS does, and our account teams and the support teams, is help us fill that gap, or at least close it. I don't think we'll ever close it, but with that support, we can at least close it, and that's what I'm so thankful for.
Yeah, and I know you push us quite hard as well, being
Absolutely.
so embedded in technology yourself. So when we think about cybersecurity and how that's going to continue to evolve, how's Sophos positioned to solve the toughest challenges?
I think it comes down to the pace of change accelerated by GenAI. As we talked about earlier on, the bad guys will get familiar with this. It will become commoditized. They will start upping their game. The barrier to entry is lower for them, so it will get more fast and furious. The bad guys will get more prolific and more sophisticated, and that's going to make it even harder for your typical organization to keep pace with it all. And I think that's going to mean that people are going to increasingly want to look at some help, look at services to help them manage their risk profile. And obviously, Sophos is in a great position with that because we have that service offering already that's in place to offer that. So I think there'll be increasing interest in that. Plus all the investment that we put in place on the big data side, all that infrastructure, I think will be a good kind of foundation for that. So that's how I see it playing out.
Okay. And what advice would you give software companies who are starting out in terms of what should their priorities be with their data strategy?
So look at what problems that you're facing and what problems others have already faced. So don't try everything that you see it might be useful. Yes, it might be useful, but you need to be cautious of, because you'll be spending a lot of money on experimenting things. But if you look at what the experts have already developed and how they have come up with solutions, look at that and then use that as a use case for your own startup or whatever you're doing for your specific use cases. Then it's going to help you progress much faster.
Guy, what
Absolutely. What Harry said is really learn from others' mistakes. Often, often you think a problem is unique, but if you look out there, 90% of the time, the problem that you're facing has been solved elsewhere. And I would look to that first, and then stand on the shoulders of giants. You just learn from others effectively, I think.
I think it's a strong community for them to tap into. I'd fully agree with that. Okay, so thank you both for your insights. For people who want to find out more about Sophos, where can they do that?
Well, obviously, lots of different channels. You can go to our website, so you can look around there. All sorts of material we publish there, not just about the latest threats, but also about how we're using or seeing AI involved in the cybersecurity space. So you can go and look at the threat reports there. But also you can go to the Trust Center. So there's plenty of material up there that we've published. A lot of that, again, is about the threat landscape, but also it's some advice on how we're looking at AI and how we're governing it that I think might be useful to others as well. So
excellent. Harry, thank you for your time today. Guy, thank you for yours. And thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.